Okay, it's 5:04, so let's do it. Thanks so much for being with us. My name is Danny Robbins. I'm the director of the Nonprofit Administration Master's Program at John Carroll University, and I'm delighted that you are with us tonight to talk about values-based leadership. So let us begin. Again, my name is Danny Robbins. I'm the director of the Nonprofit Administration Programs at John Carroll. I'm a professor of practice, which means I'm a practitioner rather than a researcher. I've spent my entire career in this field. I started in domestic violence and sexual assault programs right out of college. I went to graduate school after a couple years because I really wanted to be an executive director. And shockingly, they let me be an executive director with a master's degree at the age of 26. So I ran a domestic violence shelter in Northeast Ohio right out of grad school. Spent about 10 years total in the domestic violence sexual assault world, switched to boys and girls clubs when I was pregnant with my daughter, who is now in college herself, and became a consultant about 13 years ago, a professor of practice at Ohio State in 2015. Fell in love with teaching, started looking for a full-time position, and John Carroll came across my computer, and I was thrilled, and have been here since 2018, so the very beginning of 2018. So thank you for joining us tonight. Values-based leadership is one of the things that really changed my leadership abilities and my world once I figured out what it was and how to do it. So I appreciate you coming to the talk so I can talk to you about it. So our agenda for tonight is to talk about organizational values. We're going to walk through common mistakes nonprofit leaders make, talk about culture, talk about how to use values-based leadership to make decisions. And then, of course, anytime anyone knows me on this call, we're always going to talk about the difference between social justice and charity. Before I jump in, was there anything that you wanted to talk about that I did not just list out?
Looks good.
All right. Let's do it. So, and even though this is a talk by me, this is a discussion with you. So I will invite and expect your participation. It will make the discussion much more interesting. So our sector, the nonprofit sector, has a reputation of chewing people up and spitting them out. So I want you to think about what you've seen and or done and tell us about it. We'll start with seen because it's easier to talk about. What have you seen? Hi, Rick.
Well, hi. I don't really have anything to say. I'm somewhat newer to the nonprofit industry, so I've definitely, my experience is predominantly corporate, and I've definitely seen that a lot, just what you're displaying on the slide. But I'm curious to hear like what other people's experiences have been within this sector.
I suspect the corporate sector isn't appreciably different. It's just different in how it's, the expectations are.
Correct, right.
Individuals having to wear so many hats that they get burned out.
Yep. Lots of hats and you get burned out. Good. Anything else?
I think that often in nonprofits, we go in deciding what we think a particular segment of the community or a neighborhood needs without actually touching bases with them. And then we find out we were totally on the wrong track altogether and don't get the kind of acceptance or support we need.
Absolutely. We talk about that in the program as don't do for me without me. Yes,
oh,
absolutely.
There you go. Okay.
Yep. What else?
I think sometimes we go into the nonprofit world with an idea of the organization also. So they have a set of core values, and then the actions from that organization don't align with those core values.
Doesn't that break your heart? It breaks my heart. Yep. I'm actually teaching cultural diversity in the sector this semester, and the class coming up this week, all of my classes for that class have a headline, and the class for this week is it's much easier to defend your values than to live up to them. 100%, Sarah. Anything else?
somewhere in here, we need to be talking about funding too, because I think sometimes we get sort of a quasi commitment. Oh, we'll fund your program, we'll fund you. And then when it comes down to grant applications or whatever, all of a sudden they don't know who you are and forget that, forget that they've made that commitment.
Yeah, I don't know that we'll get to that, but I've totally seen that. So you're absolutely right. So here's what I've seen or done, right? Because I've been in this field for a long time and I learned all my lessons the hard way. So low, no, or completely unrealistic expectations of other people, of us. So of our sector and what we are going to do, which may be part of what Ms. Jan was talking about. Expectations that haven't been communicated internally. So maybe I think you're going to read my mind. Maybe you think I can read your mind, but whatever the expectations are, I don't know what they are and you haven't communicated them. Values that haven't been set so no one knows them and they aren't being lived. Not training our boards or our teams to move up, right? So the nonprofit sector at its core has three groups, right? We have program staff, operations staff, we have finance staff, and we have fundraising staff. And it's very, very hard to ascend into nonprofit leadership if you don't know all three of those lines, but it's very hard to learn all three of those lines because we don't do a great job as a sector of cross-training people. We have a tendency to promote scarcity over abundance. We have a tendency, especially when you come out of the victim services world, of not, and I think it's changing. Absolutely, Rosa. Some people are used as disposable. Rosa Beltre, who, if you don't know her, is the exec of the State Sexual Assault Coalition. That may not be the right title, and if I got it wrong, Rosa, tell me. But absolutely, treating people like they're disposable. So not collaborating, baptism by fire, which is the worst way to train people, even though it's how almost everyone I know in the sector got trained. And then allowing the unacceptable. So when I first started thinking about this, this workshop, I was at a conference and somebody was talking about how, it was okay that our staff work 100 hours a week because they're really committed to the mission. And I was thinking, not only no, but every nonprofit leader in this room should be standing up and saying no. And the fact that they're not continues to reinforce the unacceptable. So that's my list. All right, so, sorry, I went the wrong way. Let's talk about what all of those things mean and how you get stuck with them sometimes. People say ridiculous things about our sector, right? And one of them is it's just a nonprofit, right? So it's not as if we're not serving the most needy among us, the people who need the most, often who have the least. And it's not acceptable that it's just a nonprofit, so it doesn't matter. Right, that they're altruistic, so it's okay that they work 100 hours, which I just mentioned, and an expectation that we prove we're high impact, meaning by other people, but with no money to do so. And values that no one knows, aren't being lived, and no one is being held to. Boards that aren't trained, hiring for jobs they haven't done. Nonprofit boards are the only place I've seen in my career that they hire executive directors, even though most of them have not been an executive director. And the truth of the executive director role, and for all of you who are execs on the call, you can attest to this, right? Boards see this much of the role, and then the role is, you can't see my hands, but it's really big. Right? So the role is as big as my head. Boards see with the tip of my nose, and then they're hiring based on the tip of my nose rather than as big as my head. So we have to do better as far as training our boards to know the full scope of the role so that they can hire for the full scope of the role. And then we're managing teams that aren't developed so they can't move up, or are siloed so they still can't move up, or are thrown into the fire and told to figure it out, which we do, right? Like if you're in a job, you figure it out, but there's a price to that. And a history of allowing things that are unacceptable to us, hurtful to our souls, and disruptive to our organization. The chat is funny. I'm going to try to manage both. I'm not always great at managing both the chat and the lecture, but work with me here. We have a history, we as nonprofit leaders, of choosing scarcity over abundance, territorialism over collaboration, and our donors over our clients, which is another one of my things that makes me crazy. So what does it mean to do that? It means that it's the difference between mission focused and donor centered. So someone tell me your version of the difference between mission focused and donor centered.
Mission focused is really centered on who you are serving and what the outcome, what the entity is really supposed to be all about. Whereas donor centered is getting as much money as you can, getting it in, posting the numbers, maybe to make the board happy, maybe because in some aspect that's towards the mission, and that's how you make the mission grow and feed the mission. But it can become convoluted if you're just pandering to the donor, who is then in turn making requests.
Mostly. I wouldn't agree with 100% of that, but I would agree with most of that. Does anyone have anything they want to add to that? So donor-centered is all about the idea that everything we do is centered around the donor, except for we don't exist to serve the donor, right? And I love my donors, don't get me wrong. I'm a big fan of donors, right? I am a donor. I've had a lot of donors over my career who I've had lovely relationships with, but we don't exist to serve them. And if we allow ourselves to be distracted by the fact that the people who give us money should be the people we're catering to, then we are off mission. Because first and foremost, we exist to serve our community and our clients, and we can't afford to forget that. Now, Pamela's right to the extent that there's a history of donors, not a long history, well, a long history, but not a broad history. So there are occasional donors who think that because they fund something, they should be able to control that. And we have to be able to as leaders, say no to that. And part of the beautiful thing about values is then you can say these are not our values. Nick?
Yeah, as I was thinking about this, and as you were talking, Danny, it comes up as a question the question in my mind was around alignment. Who do you align to?
Mm-hmm.
Do the donors align to the mission, or does the mission align to the donors?
Absolutely.
Yeah, in terms of thinking about, and I mean, that's basically what you were describing here is that, thinking about, mission being the filter for everything. And turning money down when it doesn't align to the mission. So
Absolutely.
I think about those kinds of things and look at how some individuals are straying, off course, in order to pursue, as I think Pamela mentioned, I believe, is, just building a pot, to have it, and kind of forgetting who you are, where your compass is.
Absolutely. I was invited to present to the staff and faculty at John Carroll about the difference between mission, values, and vision, right? And the values are the guardrails, right? The values are how we conduct ourselves. The mission, the vision is where we're going, but the mission is the car, right? I mean, the mission is the car, so we can't forget the mission. All money isn't good money. Absolutely, Denise. So let's keep talking. So we have to acknowledge the unacknowledged. Most social justice and social service agencies are funded by donors who have different experiences than nonprofit leaders, who have different experiences than the staff that they lead, who may or may not have different experiences than the families we serve. Depending on the sector that you're in, there may or may not be a significant number of staff who have experience in the field. Domestic violence and sexual assault programs very often hire survivors. Alcohol and drug addiction programs very often hire those in recovery. It depends on where you are, depending on what organizations. But those are pretty different groups outside of certain sectors. So, but just because we love our donors doesn't mean that we are beholden to them. And I worry that our focus on donors comes at the expense of our families. And I don't think anyone does that on purpose, right? I think that people tend to go where the money is. So, and because of that, we get off mission. So I want you to embrace your donors, but I don't want you to forget that we don't exist to serve them. I want you to invite them to partner with us, but we exist to improve our communities, and we have to always keep that as our primary focus. So all of this to get to the point of we can make different choices. We can make choices that are centered in our values and affirming of the culture that we either have or would like to have, right? Because executive leaders set the culture or improve the culture. Organizational values. Does anyone on the call know their organization's values? Colin? Will you tell them?
Oh, yeah, yes, I guess that would be a.
You thought you were just done, Colin, but that's not
Yeah, I
how.
was like, sure, I know him. Yeah, so we actually just recently redefined our values as part of like a overhaul, like anti-racism inclusion plan. They're now community, justice, artistry, and evolution/revolution. And there's descriptors that go along with that, but we've started including that as part of like our mission statement and grants and everything, because we do feel they're really relevant to the mission.
Absolutely. That's so funny because my company's name is Nonprofit Evolution, but anyone who's known me for 5 minutes is positive it's Nonprofit Revolution. So, great values. Does anyone else have values they want to share? Nick?
Well, a couple of weeks back, I was at a board retreat, and the board had the realization that our values really aren't values. So, we're whirling into a strategic planning process, and they realize we really have to have a set of values. So, that's one of the things that I think was a rather shocking, revelation to those members of the board, which means, we really don't know what we're committed to, other than serving our, our sector, which, I work for an association that serves higher education. So.
Yeah, it's an interesting process. So let me know later, like what the process is and how far off where they land is from where they started, because that would be really interesting to me.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you for sharing that. So Colin and Nick and anyone else who hasn't shared that yet, have you had the opportunity to uphold those values and hold people to those values?
Yes, we are very forward-facing accountability wise. We published like an anti-racism, anti-bias accountability document publicly. And so we've had several events where we talk about it with the community, hear what they have to say, ask them, in what ways we are or are not living up to our values. And we do like a end of year survey with all of our staff and attendees about like what their experiences have been and if they feel like we are who we say we are. Nice.
Rosa Beltry said that her values are accountability with love, transparency, elevation, and anti-oppressive. So great. When I did this with a local nonprofit, and I said, how do you use? I said, do you have them? They said yes. I said, how do you use them? The COO said mostly for discipline. Right, which is, it's how a lot of people use them. It's not the only way to use them, but it's certainly, an easy way to use them. If one of your values is respect and one of your staff members does something that people find disrespectful, like that's an easy conversation of, hey, like this is what happened. This was our values, like, what's up, right? And then, if we believe in value, if we believe in respect, then we have to treat people with respect. And if you can't treat people with respect, then perhaps this is like, we need to make different choices. So it's not the only way, but it is how a lot of people start with discipline. Because what you're really saying is this who we want to be? If we set this as a value and then we're like way down the street, I don't remember who said it earlier, right? It's that we have values, but we're not living them. Right, like we have to live them, because the worst thing, like better you don't have them, right? Remember when we all started getting websites 20 years ago? I'm way older than probably everyone on this call. Nick, you and I. So if we like when we first like in the field started getting websites in the 90s, like everyone was like, look, if you're not going to get a good website, just don't get one at all. It's the same with values, right? Like it's worse to have values that you're not living than to not have them. But I want you to have them, and I want you to live them because they will help your leadership and they will align the work of your organization. So here's what they do. Here's why you want them. They infuse the work and they set the tone. They reflect the way your organization operates and the way your team responds to each other and to your clients. They infuse and reflect your culture, and they are the manifestation of what you tell people you care about. Right? Like we always talk about in budgeting, you want to know what someone cares about, see what they spend their money on. This is how you conduct yourself. You want to know what someone cares about, see what they value. So I'm going to tell you, when I got to John Carroll and Nick was the provost that hired me, I sat on my couch, literally, I sat on my couch and I read every single one of those values out loud and said, I can get behind that, I can get behind that, I can get behind that. And when I interviewed, and if you've interviewed at a university and it is an exec job, you interview with lots of different groups, lots of different people over the course of several days. So every group I said, this is not my faith, is that going to be a problem? And every single one of them said, no, we don't care. And I said, this is not my faith, is that going to be a problem? To a person, they said, no, like, and you can see it in the values. We believe, let me find it. We want participation of people of all faiths and no faith. Right. So I sat here and I read every single one of these out loud and I said, okay, I could do that. I can get behind that. I can get behind that. Now, these are my company's values. Right. We are responsive. If you email me, I will generally email you back within an hour or two. Everything that I give advice on is accurate. And if I don't know, I will tell you that I don't know. And if you don't need it, I will tell you that you don't need it. Like, I'm never going to take an organization's money for something that they don't need or that they shouldn't have. We will work with you and be flexible. We will operate with the highest ethical standards, and we will strive for excellence, which is the culmination of all of our values. So that's my company's values and how we conduct ourselves. These are my values. My values are respect, parity, equity, justice, voice, and community. So values intersect the work because they frame the discussion, they infuse the tone, they are felt by the clients, and they support the culture. But in order to use them, you have to be clear on what yours are. So how many of you on this call have your own values, have set your values? Nick, thank you. Anyone else? Well, let's do it. Let's do a little exercise. And here's why. Values are a deeply held view of what we find worthwhile. They come from lots of places: your faith, your family, schools, peer, people you admire. May go back to childhood. Some may be things you took on as an adult, but they help you define how you live and accomplish your purpose. And in order to move through this world, as especially in the nonprofit world, identifying your values is critical so that you can figure out where your best fit is, right? Like where you're going to be passionate, where you want to work, and where you choose to serve. I want you to set yours. You can use the list that I'm about to put up. You can pull ones out of the air. You can take them from anything else I've said so far. But I want you to take a few minutes and take 10, and then take that to 5, and then take that to 1. And then if you're willing, we can talk about your 1. Everyone with me? I'm looking at mostly empty screens except for Nick's face, so I'm just going to assume everyone is shaking their head yes. And Nick, thanks for being on with me. Thanks, Rick. All right, so here's your list. I'm going to give you a few minutes, 5 minutes, and I want you to go from 10 to 5 to 1. And you can add any that you want. Just because they're not on my list doesn't mean they're not valuable and perfect for you. 2 more minutes? One more minute? Okay, is anyone willing to share their one?
I will share mine.
Thank you.
And I think it was kind of hard to get 10 to 5. But I think meaningful work would be the most important thing, because a lot of the other categories will fall within that, under that umbrella as well, for me.
Okay,
Mhm.
good work, thank you. And in the chat, we have love. All right, love is a good number 1.
Hi, Danny. This is Diane Currup. I am with CHC Addiction Services. And I'm not sure if there's a word that encompasses this, but I would say standing up for what I believe in. And I know an example for me, when Narcan first came out, I was at dinner, at a group party dinner, and one of the people said, well, we shouldn't even use Narcan, we should just let the addicts die. And
Wow.
for me, I couldn't sit there and not
Yep.
say anything.
Yeah.
I had to educate mostly, and say, well, we're at dinner. If you need the Heimlich maneuver, I guess I'm not going to give it to you because I don't like your jacket. It's just something that I couldn't imagine, working and being in this organization, or being, having a value and not standing up for it and educating other people.
Right. So for me, Diane, that's my word for voice. I totally agree with you, and that's one of my values too. And that's what I mean by voice, meaning that
Okay.
I believe in standing up and saying something if it needs to be said, even if I'm the only one saying it.
Great.
Yep. Yeah, I'm often, I mean, right, someone has to, and if you can, you should. Sarah Bennett says empathy. Thank you, Sarah. Does anyone else want to share? Sometimes values are really personal and you don't want to, but if you want to, I'd love to hear it. I got one more person. Integrity, good. That's one of mine for my company. Nick, compassion, thank you. So good values, and it's important to know what your number 1 is. So thank you for sharing your number 1. So if you have values, how do you use them now? We talked a little bit about how you use them as the organization. How do you use them? And Diane talked about how she uses them, and that's how I use them too. Anyone else have any stories on how they use their values now? All right, well, we'll keep talking.
This is Jan. Voice was one of mine, and I had kind of captured that from the ones you had mentioned earlier. And for me, why it's important that I use my voice, I think it is as important that I have taught my residents who are very reluctant to speak out and claim, their space. I think one of the most important things I've done during my tenure at Garden Valley is to teach others how to use their voice and give them permission to use it, without criticism, but supporting them, whether I personally agree with every facet of that, of an opinion or not. But I think that's one of the most important things I have done, I feel, is to teach others how to use their voices.
Good for you. Me too. And thank you for doing that. All right. So here's what values-based leaders do, right? They keep mission paramount. They have or they develop organizational values. They align their policies with those values. And I can't stress this enough. That is critical. If you want people to believe you're living those values, your policies have to be aligned with those values. They include interview questions to ensure alignment with values, sometimes one, sometimes more. They use a performance management process to ensure values are upheld and reinforced. They know and live the values, and they hold people to the values, and then they improve or ensure the culture. I got to tell you, I go into a lot of nonprofits and I always say, do you have values? And everyone's like, oh yeah. And then I go, what are they? And they're like, oh, let me look them up, right? If you have to look them up, like, you're not living them. You're not holding anybody to them, and nobody knows them. You don't even know them. So, right, like, you need to know them. But that also means you can't have more than like 5 or 6, right? You don't want more than you can't rattle off on your fingers. So it all supports the culture, and organizational culture is the acceptable norms and behavior of the people who make up an organization. It's invisible, but it's very impactful on how people in the organization operate. It informs how people operate within the environment, what behavior gets rewarded and what gets discouraged. And culture is created by the way we conduct ourselves and the process and systems we put into place. So why culture matters? My students are always shocked by this sentence, but it is 100% true. The culture of any organization is shaped by the worst behavior the leader is willing to tolerate. That means that your worst employee is setting the tone for everything everyone else does. So I want you to think about that for a minute, because it's big and it's deep and it's true. Colin?
Yeah, no, I was sending my little clapping emoji because
I thought that was your hand up. Okay.
No, I think it's so true. We wish that it was the best, on the best employee's best day, we wish that was the culture, but ultimately whatever cracks are in the bottom of the bucket are going to be the thing that ultimately defines how useful the bucket is.
Yep, right. And that's a great illustration. I always say, like, you have to address something that's unacceptable to you when it happens and every single time it happens, because otherwise it becomes the status quo. Denise said that their legal counsel advised that if you don't hold people accountable in relation to policies, you may as well not have them. And that's true, right? The more policies that you ignore, the less valid your other policies are going to be. All right, so goal at the end of the day, and I always laugh at this part because you want a healthy culture with a happy team moving forward your mission. But the part of this that makes me laugh is the part that says paid well, because in the nonprofit sector, paid well is, not always, it's not always our premium value, but it's certainly something that we want to not resent, right? So employees stay where they are when they're paid well enough. Right? When they're mentored, when they're challenged, when they're promoted, when they're involved, appreciated, on a mission, empowered, trusted, and valued. Like, the thing I hear people talk about the most as far as their workplace and culture is valued, whether they feel valued. So the thing about leadership, though, that's hard to wrap your head around is this. Your team or boss may want a manager when you want to be a leader, or they may want a leader when you want to be a manager. Or they may want a different type of leader that is natural to you, and you have to meet them where they are. Now, some of them you will have to leave where they are, right? But the rest of them, you will have to lead to where you want them to be. So effective leaders inspire, engage, enable, motivate, and encourage. What gets leaders into trouble is not articulating where they're going, right? Not communicating how they're going to get there, getting too far out ahead of their board or their team, which tends to be when executive leaders get fired. Not being aligned with the organization's values, not paying attention to the culture, and not inspiring anyone to follow. Because we all know that a leader who doesn't have any followers is what? Not a leader. Right, look, the number one definition of leader is someone people follow. All right, so then there's managers, which is not the same thing, right? Managers set expectations. They develop people. They make sure you have the resources you need. They manage conflict. They give credit in public. They discuss opportunities for improvement in private, and they hold people accountable. What gets managers in trouble, this is a pretty robust list, but feel free to add if you have anything to add. Talking to staff about other staff. Talking to staff about their managers or about the board. Like the number of people who complained publicly about their board, I find shocking. Only upholding the policies with which they agree. Not addressing issues, which is the other side of avoiding conflict. Taking credit for other people's work. Giving some people preferential treatment over others, yelling or cursing at people, which I have to tell you, I am shocked that I still hear stories about. Like, we should not be yelling and cursing at people. The fact that I even have to say that is amazing to me, but it's like, if no one has said it, let's just say it here. We should not be yelling and cursing at people. We should not be inconsistent, and we have to be able to make decisions. Because if we're the one with the seat, then we're the one with the power to make the decisions, and we have to do so. So Lolly Gaskell is a consultant, and she has this 10-second thing to take your leadership from good to great. Create a compelling vision. Articulate that vision. Be consistent in your character. Show genuine humility. Stay focused and forge forward. Demonstrate tenacity and courage. Connect the dots. Think strategically. Be agile and flexible, and be fair. So for me, the two things that I had to figure out, and it took me way too long, but once I did, my leadership changed completely, was that HR systems has to match the organizational values, which means that organizations have to know and be able to communicate their values, which have to then be supported in their policies. So here's how that like saves you or kills you. If you have an organization and you say you value teamwork, but then everybody gets raises individually, and everyone gets evaluated individually, you don't value teamwork, right? And even worse, if you work in one of those organizations where every manager only gets a pot of money and everyone else is compared against each other, right? So if Nick gets 5%, then Rick only gets 2% because I only have 10% at the end of the day to give out, right? Like it's a system that cuts you off at the knees if you're talking about teamwork out of one side of your mouth and individual contributions out of the other one. And here's the other thing, and I really used to think that high maintenance people were worth it because they were so good, but I no longer think that. It is not good enough to be good at your job. You have to be on the team and moving the organization forward. And if you're not, much as I may love you, you can't stay. It's big, it's heavy, it's scary, but it's real. All right, I've been talking for a while. What do y'all think about anything I've mentioned thus far?
I really like that, that third, it's not enough to be good at your job. You have to be moving the organization forward, because I think there are many managers who say, I'm good at what I do. And I think we look at many of them and say, you really are good at what you do, but is that enough?
Right.
Is that enough? If the organization isn't making progress, if the people under your supervision aren't feeling valued, is it enough just to be good at your job? And maybe it's just a piece of your job that you're good at, but not enough to be able to move the organization ahead. Yeah,
yes,
I like that one a lot.
Thank you. Pam said this applies to volunteers as well, and it does. It's harder, but it totally does. Yes. Anyone else?
Hey, Danny, it's Rick. So I'm curious, as the HR practitioner as well, like what do you recommend for, like, from a compensation? And maybe I missed that, because obviously you want pay for performance right at the individual level, but of course you're on a team, right? Like an organization can't exist whether you're in an NPO or in your corporate environment. So what's like a best practice or a recommendation?
Well, I'm not an HR person, but I'm going to tell you what I do or what I believe. And I believe that I am competing against my best self, and I'm not competing against you. So I don't set up systems that it looks like I'm competing against you. So if there's a raise that we all have the opportunity to get, I should be able to get that, and you should be able to get that, and Colin should be able to get that, and Nick should be able to get that. And if we don't get it, it's because we didn't meet it, not because one of us got it and the other one didn't. Right? So I set it up like that so that everyone is clear that if you meet, like, you have goals, you know what your values are. We're talking constantly about, performance and how you're doing and what you need and what you have. And I'm holding you to those benchmarks. And if you meet all of those benchmarks, you will get whatever raise is on the table, and you will be rated against your best self, not against anyone else on the team. So that's how I do it. But what do other people think? Does anyone seen different things that they think are great?
So I've been in situations where you have really different annual performance types of methodologies. In one circumstance, we had a portfolio that was used as the annual review, which was mostly qualitative.
Yeah.
And then the person who happened to be sitting in the seat with respect to overseeing, a staff, was then, to your point you just made, required to rank order people based on a qualitative portfolio and assign raises. And you had an average to meet, which I complained about every year and told them, you're taking a qualitative system and making it quantitative, and it's also formative, not summative. You're mixing two methodologies and they're both inappropriate.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
one of the things, that can be exceedingly frustrating.
Yes.
The system I'm most familiar with now, we actually do quarterly. Myself, I set quarterly goals for myself, and folks who report to me set quarterly goals, and it's a conversation.
Yeah.
And we have a conversation around, and it's all formative. And the annual raises, everybody gets the same amount. It's a matter of how the particular, just a couple of, a difference between two organizational environments that I happen to be working in that take different approaches to the kind of review. And a good bit of it was also around your goals being aligned with the strategic plan that you're advancing at a particular point in time, and in alignment with the mission and vision of the organization going forward.
Yes. The last thing I'll say, Rick, is that yes to all of that. And I also would encourage HR people to stop saying that everyone should be rated as average, because for those of us who have never been rated as average, it is incredibly offensive to be rated as average. And then all of a sudden, we go from being a top performer to feeling unloved and unappreciated, right? And I get the intent, but we can't be so afraid of process that we sort of put everyone in the middle. So if we have a whole bunch of high performers on our team, then good for us, and let's rate them all as high performers. So good question. And then we had some stuff in the chat. Denise is saying, I think some staff get into management because they were good at their job, but they aren't good at management, which is real, right? Especially in the nonprofit sector. We have this weird habit, and maybe they do this in the for-profit sector too, I just don't work there, of taking a really good program person, and the only way we can get them more money is if we promote them to program manager, but they don't want to be a program manager. They're a really good program person, and we should figure out how to pay them at a level of being a really good program person and let them continue to be that if that's what they want to be, and that's what we need. And it shouldn't be that the only way to make more money is to have to go into management, or worse, have to go to a different department. I've seen those policies too, and I've never understood them. So, all right, let's keep it moving though, since I promised people they could, have dinner with their family or whomever you'd like to have dinner with. Okay, Leadership lessons from the field. And these are things I didn't know this, but my students have this idea that things I say like this are called Danny-isms. So now I have an article on LinkedIn called Danny-isms where you can read more of these. But here are some leadership lessons that I have gotten from the field. Any day can be the day you quit or get fired, right? That is 100% true. Your board is going to tell you to do something that you find unconscionable and you're going to say no. Right. And either you're going to say no and here's my keys, or they're going to say no and give me your keys. Like, we all have to know that any day can be the day that you quit or get fired. But until that day comes, you have a job to do. And as long as you're in the seat, you got to do the job. You can't worry so much about keeping the job that you don't do the job. You teach people how to treat you. So everything you allow, everything you ignore, everything you support, everything that you don't is teaching people how to treat you. Where you sit always determines where you stand. Whoever cares the least often has the most power. Whoever cares the most also has the most power. Please, thank you, and some grace will get you pretty far. Give people the benefit of the doubt, even and especially when you don't have it. As I already said earlier, if you allow something that's unacceptable to you, it will become the status quo. Don't do that. You will almost never have to remind yourself that people work for you. You will never have to remind people that they work for you. Everyone knows who they work for, right? It's never a question in anyone's mind who they work for. They always know who signs their paycheck and to whom they report. You may have to remind yourself, though, that you're the one in the seat and that the decision is yours to make, and then you might need to make it. Don't give away your power. Spinning wheels only looks like forward movement. So the advice I give the most are to communicate your expectations, to set deadlines, to live your values, to meet on a regular basis with your people and make sure they have what they need to succeed, to hold people accountable, and to celebrate successes, your own included. And the things I had to learn the hard way, and I'm going to tell you a story. When I first started, I told you I was 26, right? So I was 26 when I was an exec. So I used to hire people who were what I thought I was, which was young, smart, idealist, young, smart, passionate. They didn't really have to be young, but smart, passionate, idealistic. So what is not on that list? You want an entire team of people who are smart, passionate, and idealistic?
Yeah, Pamela, you beat me to it. I was going to say experience. You have to have some level of experience and expertise. You know, that helps. Yeah.
Yes, you cannot hire everyone who is young, smart, and idealistic, because someone has to actually know how to do the job.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So I had to learn that. I had to learn how to hire for what I needed, both values, judgment, experience, education, and fit. Right. I was talking to someone today and they said, well, what if they had an interview? What if what they want, I don't have? And I said, you already have the interview. So clearly, whatever you have, they want. You know, it's just, now you're really just talking about fit and judgment, right? Are you the right person? Do you have, you know, are you going to be the right fit on our team? And I do not mean fit, meaning you look like me, or you were raised where I was raised, or we have the same background. I mean fit as, are you aligned with our values, and can you, will you be a good addition to this team? So I had to learn how to hire for those things. And then gaps, right? What am I not good at? What do we not have on the team that we need on the team? I had to learn how to communicate what I needed. So it's not just that I know what I needed, but you need to know what I need so that I could actually get it. To hold people accountable, to not check in too often, because I have a sense of urgency and I have to learn how to check my sense of urgency. You know, like our strengths and weaknesses flow from the same well. So you heard me say earlier, I'm responsive. Partly I'm responsive because I have sense of urgency issues, but it works for me. You got to figure out how to make it work for you. I had to set up timelines to play to my strengths and tamp down my weaknesses. That means that I don't hire people who like to do things at the last minute, because the last minute makes me crazy. And nobody wants to work with a crazy, like hyped up person, right? So because I know that about myself, I don't surround myself with people who like to do things at the last minute, except for my kids who love to do everything at the last minute. But besides them, right, you build a team that plays to your strengths. So we get things in on time. If I have a grant due, that grant is generally done a week before. My stuff is always in early because I don't want to be sitting up at midnight stressing that I didn't do whatever it was I was supposed to do. Plus, we all know working in this field, you are going to have to run and get a letter of support or a memorandum of understanding or something dumb because you didn't read the instructions 3 days before a grant is due. So if you have it done a week early, then you're already ahead of the game. That my organization's values have to match my own. What do y'all think about all of that? Do you have any stories you had to learn the hard way? From the chat? Experience. Also hate the last minute. I know, it's terrible. Nick, were you going to say something?
It was to curb my own impatience, and they really, and in some ways it's checking your own urgency, because then if I got too impatient, I'd end up doing it myself.
Yes.
And that's not good for me or the person I asked, or it's not good for their development. It's not good, as well. So, being able to really, if you're going to, really empower people, empower them, and guide, give them guidance if needed, check in occasionally. And you hope that folks will work up to what you're expecting.
Yep. I used to have a board president who used to say, he was about kids. Kids will, what did you just say? Kids will work up to your expectations or down to your suspicions.
Yeah.
That's a great one.
I love that. That's great.
All right. So there's other leadership points. Leaders who don't listen will eventually be surrounded by people who don't have anything to say. Right? Like if I say something 3 or 4 times, Nick just said earlier that he didn't like this system and he kept complaining about this system. The system doesn't change. At some point, like, I'm just talking and I hate when I'm just talking. Right? And then I stop talking because you're not listening to me anyway. So the biggest concern for any organization should be when their most passionate people become quiet. So when Diane was talking earlier about voice, like when Diane stops talking, you should be worried. When I stop using my voice, you should be worried. Here's the other thing. When you have to start compromising your morals for the people around you, it's time to change the people around you. So let's bring it all together. How do you use values to support decision-making, to build and maintain the culture you want or want to keep, and to advance your mission? Does anyone have a teachable point of view? So a teachable point of view is from Noel Tishy, who was at the University of Michigan, and then he was at, I think, GM. But it's like it's like a stool, right? So the teachable point of view is edge. You have to be able to make hard decisions. It's performance. I have to be able to communicate to you what it is we're trying to accomplish, how you fit in, and what your role is in our success, right? And you have to be aligned with our values. So edge, performance, values. Because we're in the nonprofit sector, we have to talk about scarcity or abundance. So of scarcity or abundance, which is better? Abundance, absolutely, Colin. Abundance is better, right? We all would like more money, more resources, more food, if that's what we need, right? Like abundance. And scarcity is the whole idea that we don't have enough, right? And the problem with our field being set up on a scarcity model is that we're always making these calculations. There isn't enough money, staff, or stuff. So everything we are deciding is getting made through a lens of cost. But cost is not a value, right? Cost is not our mission. Cost is not cost is real, but cost is not only. It doesn't have to be like that, right? For those of us who have more than one child, it's not like we had to like parcel out the love for the other kid when the second kid came, right? Like it just expands, right? That's abundance. We can make different choices and we should make different choices. Abundance is the idea that the world is ever expanding. And if they can, you can, we all can. Because life is not a zero-sum game and I don't have to lose for you to win because you're not competing against me anyway. You are competing against your best self. You are responsible for your work. I am responsible for my work. And if we agree to that and hold people to it and set up our organizations like that, we would be vibrant and our organizations and our world would be abundant. So social justice is working to change systemic issues. We do it collectively. Social justice is advanced collectively. Charity is responding to the immediate need. And none of us are going to let a kid go hungry so we can go down to Columbus to advocate to have more food. But we also can't only feed the kid in front of us. We have to figure out why so many of our kids are hungry. And we get to decide each day if we're going to be territorial or collaborative and under what circumstances. And if we're going to run our agency to be the best, whatever it is, alone, or if we're going to work together because we want to eliminate the systemic issue causing the need for this work. Because I've been doing this work for 30 years, and I got to tell you, even though it's a little better, there's still too much work, right? So we gotta change the way we're doing it and do it collectively so that we can advance social justice. And I believe that if we set and live our values, create the culture, and choose justice, we will build the willingness, the capacity, and the passion to meet our mission. So I got a couple more things, but let's stop here. And I want you to take 3 minutes and write down 3 things that you will use from this presentation. And then if you're willing, you can share. I think that's 3 minutes. My students always make fun of me because I throw these numbers out and then I don't track them. But I think that's 3 minutes. We're close to it. Is anybody willing to share?
Sure, I'll share. I had one as the worst behavior of an employee defines the culture of the organization. 2, as the leader who doesn't listen will eventually be surrounded by people with nothing to say. And that it's not enough to be good at your job, but you have to move the organization forward.
Ooh, good ones. Thank you. Anyone else?
The one that, the one regarding aligning our values to the organization's work, because I think sometimes when the needs are so great that we are trying to address in our neighborhood, sometimes we need to be reminded that we can't jump off and get distracted and just address that issue at that time, that our work must always be aligned with our values. I have an issue with abundance and scarcity. I think some of my greatest work has been because resources were scarce.
Sure.
It made me think more creatively. It made me drill down a little bit deeper at the issues. It made me reach out to other resources that were, available, and other partners that I might not have reached out, to before. I've never been in a situation since I've been in nonprofit work where abundance
Right.
was
None of
present.
us have, but wouldn't it be nice?
It would be nice. I can't quite imagine that. That would require reimagining, what that would be like. And I
Yeah.
really like the first one that was given before about about the work. Being good at your job doesn't necessarily mean you have the ability to move an organization forward.
Right. Thank you. Anyone else? Probably have time for one more. We got something in the chat. The culture barometer is huge. Monitoring the acceptance of the worst behavior is imperative. Yep. One more? You don't have to. Nick?
Yeah, I'm thinking about abundance, and I'm wondering whether or not we might maybe think about it in different facets. I think when we think about abundance right away, we think about resources. Yeah, and it was just some of the comments, that we listened to just now, is that, well, what are other forms of abundance that can help with our work?
Right.
Like an abundance of partnerships,
Right.
And how that can lift, or, one of the things that I had put on my list was that grace goes a long way, and
Yes.
to sort of think about an opportunity to really have an abundance of grace at times and recognize, where people are, and meeting them where they're at, whether they're who you're serving, or even thinking about your employees, and you serve them as well if you're in a
Yep.
leadership position. So I think, it's going to give me a lot to think about now. So in a good way.
Then I have done my job.
Yes. So yes. The last thing I would say is be relentless when pursuing your values. Yeah, I really, for me, that was a constant theme, and it was good to be reminded of that. Thanks, Danny.
Good, thank you. Thank you. Well, before I'm going to end with some questions, but because we are here at the grace of John Carroll and the nonprofit program, I do want to take 1 minute to plug the program. If you've been thinking about graduate school, and if you're in a position to recommend a program, please consider ours. The program is housed in the Bowler College of Business and is an interdisciplinary program. All our classes are one night a week from 6:30 to 9:15. In the summer, they're 2 nights a week. And our mission is to develop unapologetic social justice leaders, and we're serious about that. So if that speaks to you, please reach out. I'd love to tell you more. I have a note in the chat. Reminder that your values should align with the organization's. Absolutely. All right, so does anyone have any final questions? Or any questions? Any points you wanted to make but didn't get a chance? Any feedback for me? Feedback is a gift. I would appreciate yours.
One thing that occurred to me, we started the conversation talking about burnout, and being sort of in over your head, baptism by fire, et cetera, and devoting some more time to strategies for mitigating that would be helpful. I did get up and had to go answer a phone call for like 10 minutes, so you may have done that while I was gone, but it was something that I was thinking about.
Right. Well, no, that's a great question. I guess I was thinking that if we lived our values more, the things that I started with on the list at the beginning would happen less. So that was how I was framing them. That doesn't really get to burnout, but it does get to if one of our values is respect and grace, or any of those words, right? Then we can't, or voice. Right, then we can't allow our staff to do things that aren't healthy for them, right? I mean, none of us have jobs that means we're going to be home for dinner every night, right? But it does mean that we're not going to allow our people to work 80 hours a week, or we're not going to allow our people to to do things that are unsafe, and we're not going to allow the families that we serve to be in positions that are unsafe. So it means we're going to be intentional about how we lead, and hopefully, Colin, some of the things that were on my initial list will be mitigated by the fact that we're leading in a way that's more intentional.
Totally, yes, thank you.
My pleasure. Anyone else? Any other final questions? Someone asked about the deck. We can send the deck out with the evaluation. And the evaluation should come out sometime at the end of this week. Hopefully. We have one of our people has had some challenges, so I'm not sure they're around, but once they get back, they will we will send out the evaluation and the deck. Any other questions, comments, feedback? All right, well, thank you so much for your time tonight. I really enjoyed having you with us, and I look forward to seeing you in the field soon.
Thanks, Danny. Bye, all.
Bye. Have a good night, y'all. Thanks for coming, Nick.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good to see you, Rosa.